Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inclusive Collective, where we share stories and learnings of inclusive people, organizations, and innovation. I'm your co-host, Rob Hadley, a people and culture strategist specializing in DE&I and people analytics. I am normally joined by Nadia Butt, an organizational development and belonging strategist. Today, however, we have a treat for you all. Sitting in with the band in his sister's place is Asad Butt, founder of Rifelion Media, host of the Invisible Hate podcast. He's our boss around here. And you may also remember him from an earlier episode of Inclusive Collective. You may also know him from several stints as an on-air reporter. Asad, what's going on?
I've been a failure throughout my career until today, Rob. Until today on this podcast, finally things turn around.
Were you ever on air in Boston?
I was never on air in Boston. I was on air in Maine, and then
Okay.
in Buffalo as well. Yeah, so I was a producer, behind the scenes kind of writer, assignment editor in Boston, and never really a reporter. In the
You
actual
should
sense.
see the local newscasts in Utah.
Oh, I love local news. It's so exciting. The yeah, everything.
I'm
The
a
music,
huge fan. Yeah.
yeah,
Get
for
my
sure, totally.
popcorn. So
Yeah.
Ozzy, you were here, I think over a year ago.
Oh,
And I just
wow.
wanted to just check in. What all has gone on, in addition to this huge show that you have, Inclusive
Yeah,
Collective.
for sure.
What else is happening? What's new?
Yeah, so, I think for certainly from a Rifelion perspective, we as you mentioned, we have this Invisible Hate podcast, which is for
Yeah.
those that like true crime. We're really focusing on true crimes that are essentially hate crimes or
Hmm.
potential hate crimes. And the reason, Rob, that we're focusing on this is because, hate crimes generally go vastly underreported and under-prosecuted in the US. Some say upwards of 250,000 hate crimes occur every year in the US, but only like 10 or 15,000 get prosecuted. And so we kind of are looking at what's in that gap. What are those cases that maybe should be prosecuted as a hate crime but
Hmm.
aren't, and why aren't they? And then we just, we want to bring awareness to these crimes that are typically happening against minorities. So that's one big project, and then another big project, really briefly, that I think you'll like is that we've kind of been in a beta launch that we're launching kind of officially live later this month. We have a website called Fawn.
Mm.
Fawn in Arabic means art, and so we are cataloging all creative projects done by American Muslims: music, TV shows, movies, books, theater, and writing news and articles around that. And so really just like we want this to be a central place where people that are interested in learning about what American Muslims are contributing to the arts and culture in America, they can go and find out about that. And so that website is createfon.com.
Amazing. Amazing. Cool. Yeah. And I know that there's probably half a dozen other things that you could,
Oh, all sorts of stuff. I mean,
those are the
as you can
things you're
see, I got my
plugging
little
right
baby
now.
girl that we created as well. So yeah.
Yes, we do have a co-host, but when we get to the video, we'll have to cut some video, but hopefully she doesn't wake up as we're recording
Yeah, exactly right.
today.
If you hear her,
And
she's just yeah,
and if she
uh,
does, that's cool too, right?
totally.
So thanks again for co-hosting with me today. Let's talk about we do this thing we call the deets.
The
Right. So let's talk
deets.
about a couple of different stories. Our first story today is in the context of a couple of things that we've been talking about recently, right? So Anheuser-Busch backing down, reversing course after they aligned themselves with trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney. And then just last week, we learned about Target backing down and pulling some of their LGBTQ plus pride apparel from stores where conservatives had complained. The North Face, however, has been paying attention, apparently. The company has been featuring the drag queen Patty Gonia in a Summer of Pride campaign. And when the company faced criticism from internet trolls such as Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, they're also, I think, in their spare time, they're U.S. Congresspeople.
Yeah.
Um, the North Face stood firm, issuing a statement that they're proud of their association with this person, and that the company has received praise from organizations like GLAAD for sticking with their Pride campaign. I said, you're a business owner. Do you think businesses are learning from what they've seen this spring with some of these anti-LGBTQ plus campaigns?
Yeah, look, I think bottom line is I think obviously the North Face is getting it right. And I think that they're doing it partly, I think, because it's the right thing to do. And I think they're doing it partly because it's probably good for their bottom line, right? How many people in, Marjorie Taylor Greene's district are going to be wearing the North Face? I'm guessing not a lot. I'm guessing their clientele is mostly, East Coast and West Coast. And that's the cynic in me, right? But regardless, it's the right move for them and right move for humanity. And, yeah.
Well, Lauren Bomber is from Colorado, so I would expect there to be a little bit of North Face gear out in Colorado,
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
in the
you're right.
mountains.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think the one
Okay,
thing
so
we
yeah,
know we know is bad business is saying I'm for this, and then when you get pushback, saying, "Oh no, I'm sorry,
right,
I'm not
right.
for this." You get to be in trouble with everyone at that point,
Yeah,
right? So we know that that's
exactly.
bad
Yeah, yeah.
business, in addition to not being the right way to go about doing things. And so this is proving out, I hope it's proving out a hypothesis that I have, which is that, companies should be gaming out their response in advance. So they know it's coming.
Yeah,
There's
right.
really no excuse. We know that conservative activists are going to show up either in stores or online. So be prepared because there's really no going back, as we were just talking
Yeah,
about. If
totally,
you commit
totally.
to it, you kind of have to go forward with it. It should be almost like a we don't negotiate with kidnappers type of line
Yeah,
that
agreed.
companies have to take in here. So
Yeah.
um,
No, that's a great point.
yeah. All right. So next story, Equinox, the place that I would have always loved to work out, but could never afford to.
Yeah.
When I lived in Boston, was ordered to pay a woman $11.25 million, former employee for harassment and discrimination. So a
Wow.
couple interesting things in the article that I want to get your response. So the article in the New York Times is where we saw this, talks about how the fitness industry is traditionally a place where people of color, women in particular, can make a good wage, but the management is mostly white and male. And
Mm,
then this case revolved around the actions of her subordinate, which I thought was really interesting. A white
yeah,
male
sure.
that often made comments about Black female bodies, referred to non white employees as lazy, and even wanted his manager, this woman, to help him pick up other women, saying,
It's
it'll help
wild.
me to have you around me. And then,
It's
there was even
wild.
this incident where she received a request for a white trainer, and that was, very psychologically
Yeah.
damaging for her as well. So, um, you read the article. What did you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they got it right, obviously, with the harassment and discrimination. I thought the award that she was given, the 11.25 million. I mean, woo, I mean that is to me that's a lot. And so, what kind of precedent is that setting? I think questions that I have for you, Rob, in regards to this, and as a business owner, is like, I guess how much is or should a company be liable for the actions of one of their employees? And presumably, you know, Equinox as a company doesn't condone any of this.
Hmm.
And I guess was the end result because they took an action, or because this one employee in particular, or multiple employees collectively were harassing or discriminating. It's interesting to me for sure.
I would say I don't know what the number. I don't know what the right number is. Right. So is 11 million the right number for pain and suffering? I have no idea. I have no idea how toward awards are are determined. Right. So we saw FedEx have to pay $360 million
Yeah.
to a woman this past year for discrimination that was sustained over a long period of time. And when you say that Equinox doesn't condone it, they say they don't condone it, right? And it's certainly in
Correct.
their
Correct.
policies that they don't condone it. But but based on the way that this, and obviously the jury saw this, um, they did condone it, right? And it
Yeah.
did happen
Yeah.
repeatedly. It
Yeah.
did. It was something that was sustained over a long period of time. I thought it was interesting. And I think that the fact that again that it was a subordinate, I think that's something that companies are not paying attention to
Yeah.
at
That's true.
all, and I think they
Yeah.
should be now that this
It's
happened. I
really
think it'll
smart.
be a
Yeah.
big wake up call, and it could be the tip of the iceberg for this, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
don't think
For
about
sure.
the fact that your subordinates can make you uncomfortable or have an impact on something like this in terms of discrimination and harassment. So
Yeah.
that was really interesting. Um, so yeah, so we'll see it, and I think that the companies again, it's just the start. I think there's a lot of different places this could go. Talk about this on a couple times where I think that there's just so much data that could be used against companies out there. If 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 plaintiffs knew where to look
Yeah.
sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Totally. I agree. Yeah. No.
So, well, thanks so much, Asad. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll have our guest, Mariyam Cementwala, the Blind Hijabi. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Inclusive Collective. Our guest today is Mariyam Cementwala. Mariyam is a first-generation immigrant who was the first in her family to complete college and graduate education. Her formative years as a youth activist and advocate for marginalized groups define her approach to collaboration, coalition building, and inclusion. Today, the first disabled Muslim American female recipient of the George J. Mitchell Scholarship. Mariyam's life experience includes representing American culture and values on 3 continents and navigating war zones. She was the youngest person in the room drafting the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Mariyam is a recovering lawyer and served as a congressional fellow and a government affairs strategist in the nonprofit sector before becoming the United States' first visibly disabled female diplomat of color in 2011. Although in her day job, she's the senior policy advisor in the Secretary of State's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, advising and creating policies. Today, she joins us as the founder of her own website that she recently launched called the Blind Hijabi, and has a forthcoming podcast and lots of other projects, which I'm sure she'll tell us about. So, Mariyam Cementwala, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you. Welcome to Inclusive Collective.
Rob, thank you for having me, and thank you to your team, because it, does take a team, a village to make these things happen, as I well know. So, looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent.
Great. Mariam, thanks for joining. My first question for you is around, these multiple identities that you have, right? So, blind, hijabi woman, I believe Indian American, in an inter-race relationship. I wonder, I guess my first question is like, what was it like for you when you first joined the workforce, going into the office every day? What kind of challenges did you encounter in the workplace?
I love that question because it gives me a chance to talk about something that I think people are afraid to talk about. And one of my mottos is be afraid and do it anyway.
Hmm.
And so I have been in situations where I've definitely been afraid. I've definitely been the only lonely. I've definitely been the only one in the room that is like me, right? There's no one else quite like that there.
Yeah.
Right.
And that is something that I had to get comfortable with, and something that I had to leverage. And so I really believe in the power of leveraging your identity, because you're going to be memorable. You're going to, whether you want to or not, you're going to be seen and you're going to be heard. And so when you're going to do that, because of these multiple identities that you have that are so different from what people might consider the norm, use that power, use that leverage that you have, because now you have suddenly the gift of privilege. And it's weird saying that, right? Like you think, oh, no, no, we associate privilege with white men. But I want to flip that for a second and say, no, when you are memorable, and I perhaps at times regret that I am memorable. I am sure others around me at times regret. My husband being one who said, I don't really want to be famous, Mariam. I don't really want to be known. I don't really want to stick out, right? And so at times you regret wanting to be or becoming or being memorable. But I say use the privilege of being memorable to do good, because now you have the privilege to elevate your voice, right? And the privilege to be heard. So you've now got the power to elevate your voice, and you have the privilege to be heard because you're memorable. So use that power and use that privilege. That is something that I became very comfortable with very early. And if I may, one story I'd like to tell is we were recently, my husband and I, we were in a course, and we were in a foreign affairs counter threat course in my day job, in which you go to this town in Virginia, and you spend time doing really interesting things that we in any of our day jobs probably don't do, but frankly I think we should all learn to do, like learning how to use a first aid kit and plugging a wound that might be bleeding, right?
Yeah.
Or in an instance of gun violence, which is so sadly rampant, these days. It's not something I grew up with. I grew up in the generation before Columbine. And uh, so, learning how to, if somebody gets shot, how are you going to assist them in that moment and try to uh, take the steps needed before help arrives, before
Hmm.
professional emergency responders arrive. In our context, in my day job context, it's more like getting away from a vehicle that might be attacking you in a car,
Mm.
right? And so I'm sitting behind the driver or next to the driver, and I'm not driving because I'm blind, right? How am I going to take over the car if the driver gets shot? And nobody would think a blind person's going to say, "Teach me how to do that." But both
Hmm.
my husband and I said, "Teach me how to do that." And our instructors were marvelous. They were absolutely marvelous. They said, "Yeah, let's figure it out. Let's do that." And so I have never driven a car really in my life, but I learned how to go from the drive gear to neutral to park. I also
Hmm.
learned about how to pedal the gas and speed away to steer. And the idea was, let's suppose that the driver next to me is injured but can still see. How can I then assist in that moment? Let's suppose the driver next to me suddenly has uh, a medical emergency and cannot drive. How do I safely, you know, pull the car over or at least get it to stop so I'm not continuing, to propel the car forward, right? And crash.
Right.
So I mean, just learning those skills, which seem a bit scary and situations that seem far-fetched. I mean, that's where I say be afraid and do it anyway, right? And so whether you're in a boardroom, whether you're briefing in a presentation, whether you're in a car and you're in a country that has some actors that are less friendly to you, you've got to know how to think in that moment. And as my instructor said, there are only really two ways to go: forward or backward. Stopping is not an option, right?
I
There's two ways to do this. You've got to go forward or you got to go backward. And either one can be right or wrong in the moment. But whatever keeps you alive is the right answer. And so
Right.
that's, you know, it comes down, when you have multiple identities, it comes down to resilience in order to survive. And I think that what I am trying to do through the Blind Hijabi is tell the story of resilience in all of us, tell the story of power and privilege in all of us, because all of us can find power in our identities.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to talk about the blind hijabi, and I love and everything that you just said. There's about five or six things that I like that I
I
really
know.
loved.
I want to know your driving stories. That's what I want to know.
Yeah, yeah. Do we have any video of that?
We do, actually. I will
Oh.
share it with you. No, it's
Oh,
Let's
public.
amazing.
share it. Let's.
Yeah, I will
That's
absolutely
amazing.
share it with you. There's also a video of me like beating up a dummy. Sorry. There's also a video of me beating up a dummy very
Oh,
vigorously.
I
that's
So
great.
I
Amazing.
don't think I
I'm.
did a very good job, but
I
you
want to
can
become a
judge for
diplomat.
yourself. Absolutely.
Is this what you do as a diplomat? Is this
so
you have
so
to?
people ask me. I spoke in my day job at a conference. They first introduced the video and then me, and I said, I just want to tell you, this is not what I do in my day job every day. I'm sure that in all of our workplaces, there are moments in time when we wish we could do that, but we let the better angels of our spirits reign and, you know, uh, call our patience. This is where I think my faith plays a pivotal role, because I think one of the gifts that I uh, have also decided to leverage is the gift
Hmm.
of my faith. And I wear a particular outfit that reminds me of my faith and my values every day, so that when I have those moments of wanting to blather four-letter words that are not polite and should not be said in polite company, I, have a moment of reflection and introspection and, try to call the better angels of my spirit.
Are you saying as a Muslim I shouldn't be swearing? Oh no.
I am not commenting on that. I am not telling one Muslim to another. I will not tell you how to live your faith. It is to each their own. And that's inclusion, right? That's the spirit. I mean, what are we talking about when we talk about inclusion? It doesn't look cookie cutter or the same for one person, whether you're Muslim, whether you're blind, whether you're a person of color, whether you're LGBTQI plus. You know, each of us has our own experience in that identity and our own story in that identity. And through the Blind Hijabi, I'm going to tell mine. And I'm hoping that I'll get to share others who want to share theirs.
So you've had this interesting career. You've been all over the world. You have all these stories. Obviously, you can pretty much tell a story about anything in any situation. And so, you've been in a place like State Department, and it's, you're kind of behind the scenes doing things. And so what made you decide that this is the time to be more outward and be more forward about the things that you believe, and try to express yourself in an outward fashion?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's a personal choice. It is something that my family and I wrestled with because, as I said, I'm already memorable enough. Do I really want to be more public facing? I mean, in a sense, you're right. In the State Department or in my day job, I'm behind the scenes as a lawyer, at a big firm. I was, as an associate, certainly more behind the scenes. Even, on the Hill as staff, as a fellow, I was behind the scenes. The forward facing person is the senator, right? Or the member. And so why be more forward facing? And my answer to that question is representation matters. Representation matters a lot. My sister said something to me that I won't forget, and that really moved me. She said, there are moms somewhere in some corner of the world, in South Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Western Hemisphere. There are kids, and whether they have disabilities, or whether they're moms of kids with disabilities, or whether they're just moms of little girls, or moms of kids who are quote unquote different, they're going to look at you and they're going to derive a sense of hope. And I thought that was a little daunting, a little profound, a little scary. And I said, I don't want to be that because, my husband put it best when he said, we often get the statement, oh, you're an inspiration, or your story is so inspirational. And my husband said, I don't show up to be inspirational. Right. I just show up. And that's it. I think for me, the project, I called the Blind Hijabi a bit of a project because it is. It's the project of storytelling. And what I'm hoping to do is not just tell my story, but in the future, tell the story of others, tell the story of respect for human difference and human dignity. Because actually, when you strip away the blind and you strip away the hijabi, you're just left with the. And the could be about anything. Anyone. Rob, it could be about you. Asad, it could be about
even me,
you.
Right?
It could be about anybody, right? Like, and you could be non-disabled, which is a temporary condition, because I think the only permanent condition, especially as we age, is disability, right? 25% of Americans are individuals with disabilities. Yeah. But the sad thing is over 66% of working age Americans with disabilities don't have a job. Don't have a job.
Wow.
Right.
And if we're there, I shudder to think where the rest of the world is. And I know from experience and from my travel and from stories that we've got a long way to go. So how do we change that narrative? How do we flip that narrative? The Blind Hijabi is about changing and flipping not just that narrative, but the narrative of power and privilege, by saying, look, we're all memorable. We've all got a voice. We've all got to use it. We've got to deploy it. And we've got to use it effectively in the moment. And I don't always use it effectively in the moment. So one of the conversations I'm having with myself and with others on the Blind Hijabi is, what are the mistakes I've made? And how do I learn to fail up? How do I learn from my failures? Because the other thing that tends to happen with people who have multiple identities and who are memorable because of those identities, unfortunately, is that every mistake they make is magnified in a microscope.
Right.
And that's scary. And I said recently I said, imposter syndrome is real. It never goes away. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that no matter where I'll go and what I'll do and what next I will do and what I will become, because evolution is constant and transformation is necessary, I will continue to feel in some way, shape, or form like, did I really do this right? Do I really fit here? Do I really belong? And that's a question that we will all, in some way, shape, or form, perennially wrestle with, even you, Rob. And I'm sure
Sure.
you do. And I'd love to hear how you wrestle with that, right?
People just openly tell
I
me
want
that I'm an
No,
imposter.
you
They
know
just come right out
something?
and say it.
I'm sure they do, because one of the first posts I wrote is middle-aged white man has thoughts. And people thought, "Ooh, what's she going to say?" That's and the funny thing was, middle-aged white man has thoughts was actually about people like you, Rob, who are people who are true allies,
Hmm.
and how those allies have been immensely important in my life and how they can be important in other people's lives. The work that you're doing here on the Inclusive Collective, the stories you're telling, the data you're sharing, the awareness you're raising, you're doing that as, and now I can't see you, so I'm going to make some assumptions, but I'm guessing a middle-aged white man who has a lot of important and good thoughts.
You're gonna
I
make Rob cry now. I mean,
I
I see
don't
it coming.
know.
He's
I'm
getting
not
emotional.
comfortable with the middle age part, but yes, right.
I know.
But
I'm
yes, I
not
definitely,
either. That's one
I
of the
think
parts of my identity I don't like to talk about either.
I love with you. I love where you went with that though, because it's definitely, the one thing I would say though is I think syndrome is is real for everyone. The
Yes.
one thing that I don't have in addition to that is the burden of feeling like if I mess something up, that I'm messing it up for people that will come behind me, or
Yeah.
people that look like me, right? Like I think that
Yeah.
that's
That is.
where the differentiation is for me, that I think is very, that's an important distinction. So
I think you're right about that. And I think that's why the allyship is so important, right? That's why
yep,
you
yep,
speaking up and speaking out for those, particularly those who fail, and saying, you know what, if I did that, you wouldn't judge me as harshly. So why are you judging her as harshly?
for
I think
sure.
that's a key intervention that, you can make, and that others around you would then learn from and say, you know what, I can do that and I should do
Yeah.
that. And I think we as women often are guilty of judging other women harshly. I certainly was judged harshly by other women, right? Like, you need to be better, you need to be softer, you need to. And I remember this, especially in the law firm world, seeing this a lot. Female partners who said, "Well, I climbed up the ladder, so you should suffer and do it too, and suffer just like I did." And my attitude is, I want to make it easier for those who come after me, and take that, burden of feeling like, oh my God, I am going to fail, or I failed and I'm going to be judged. I want to take that burden. I can't take it completely away, but I want to talk about that burden and make it a little lighter and say, you know what? Others feel that too. You're not alone. And that is also part of what the Blind Hijabi is trying to do. So it's really an open conversation. It's really a conversation so that people can see themselves represented in multiple identities, because no one identity is going to take precedence in a given moment.
Yeah. Remember, we are running out of time, but I had one question that I wanted to just get your thoughts on, and that was one of your early blog posts. You said, I'm going to quote you, that you're very comfortable with confusion, even chaos, and trying to help people through it. And I guess I'd love a little bit for you to expand on that a little bit, but also, like, I think that's just generally such a optimistic view of humanity and people, and generally shows kind of an understanding that, like, yeah, we're gonna mess things up, and people are gonna try to, hopefully people want to learn from their mistakes, and the confusion and the chaos. But maybe just expand on that very briefly.
Yes, I absolutely will. So I I'll give you a very real example that sort of connects it all together in one sense, right? I am a person of faith. When I grew up, we didn't use pronouns. Today we do. And today it is becoming more and more common to state your pronouns. And people have had the conversation about, well, why are we using they for one person? And ultimately it's about live and let live, right? And it's about allowing people to be comfortable in whatever their identity is. And is there confusion for one particular person as an individual who grew up with a certain set of beliefs and values? And that there might be. Do you find that a bit chaotic? Perhaps at times, even I do. But we have to get comfortable with that. We have to be accepting of that. Not, I mean, people will say this a lot. It's not just about tolerance, it's about acceptance. It's not just about tolerance or acceptance, it's about embracing human difference
Hmm.
and valuing it and saying, what does this person who comes to me with whatever their pronouns are bring to the table in terms of perspective, value creation for my company, my workspace, my friendship, you
Mhm.
know, any of those arenas. And that's a difficult place to find ourselves in at times when we are reconciling or trying to figure out what our faith teaches us. But ultimately, what our faith teaches us is be good people, treat people kindly, treat people with respect and dignity.
That's
And
great.
when we get to those core values, it becomes very easy. And that's why I say I'm confused. I'm comfortable with confusion and chaos. I'm also, in a very logistical sense, comfortable with confusion and chaos because, I would love to have control of every variable. My husband will tell you that,
Yeah.
but I can't. I can't. I mean,
Of
whether
course.
you look at my personal life or my professional life, I rely on other people for support because
Sure.
I am, in a very visible way, apparent way, interdependent, but really all of you are interdependent, right? I mean, you're depending on someone to do something. You're depending on the mail carrier to show up that day with your tax bill for your property. And if the person doesn't or they lose it, you may not get it and you may be late paying your property tax. So
Yeah.
you don't think about the fact that you're interdependent on that person, but you are. I am interdependent on people. I'm on my Uber driver to show up and find me and identify me, on my human reader who assists me. I'm interdependent on a range of folks, and sometimes they can't be relied on either because I misjudged who they were or because life happened to them. And what happens in that moment? There's confusion and chaos. Okay, the thing or the action or the person that I was dependent on, the tool failed me. Now what do I do? And you just have to work through it, you know?
Rob,
And so that's why I
Rob
said
tells
I'm
me
yeah.
I fail him all the time.
So
It's
that's what
never
I mean
happened.
by
Yeah.
comfortable with confusion and chaos. I mean, unfortunately, that's the world we live in, and increasingly so, right? Increasingly, we
Yeah.
live in a more complex world that is going to challenge us with things like the proliferation of artificial intelligence, the proliferation of autonomous cars. All kinds of things are going to challenge the way that we think, that we work, and that we experience each other and that we experience life. And that is going to cause confusion and chaos. And in that moment, we have to recenter ourselves through our values.
I love that. Again, so many great things, Miriam. I think we need to do, 2 or 3 episodes with you because I think
Yeah.
you've got so many little pearls of wisdom that we can grab onto, and so I really appreciate it. I want to encourage all of our listeners to check you out at the blindhijabi.com. And then we also ask our guests, is there any resources that you think they should be, that the audience should be paying attention to? Anything you're reading or books or podcasts that you're a fan of, either in the world of disability inclusion or religious inclusion as well?
So I love that question. I will say the two books that I recently have recommended to folks, one is not new and one is fairly recent, about 2 years old. The first is called Being Human, and it's an autobiography of one of my very dear friends and mentors who recently passed away, Judith Human, who was known as the mother of the disability rights movement. And some of the things that she talks about, the othering she experienced, the fact that she was called a fire hazard because she happened to use a wheelchair and wanted to teach elementary school kids, or because she just wanted to enter a classroom as a kindergartner and wanted to be taught herself, right? Those are things that haven't necessarily changed sufficiently, but that are slowly changing. And what I think is so important is the book tells us that systems, structures, bureaucracies will try to wear you down and wear you out. How do you keep hope? How do you keep optimism? How do you build resilience? That's what I think that book sort of reminded me of. And I thought that was useful for anyone, disabled or non-disabled, to check out. The second book has nothing to do with inclusion in a direct sense. It's called Difficult Conversations. And I really like that book because, Rob, I've heard you say it before on the Inclusive Collective, but speaking about equity, inclusion, etc., is actually just talking about good management and good leadership. And good communication is what I would add. And so I think it's just a useful tool for communication. And I read it when I was in law school in a mediation course because you want to learn how not to be or come across as adversarial in a very adversarial environment, right? Law schools and law practice is by its nature designed to be an adversarial environment. And I thought that book was valuable for that reason, Difficult Conversations. And of course, check out www.theblindhijabi.com and at
There
The
you
Blind
go.
Hijabi on Instagram and Twitter and the Facebook page. And, we will continue to expand. But one of the ways that I will expand more effectively is if I hear from others on what they need and how I can be receptive to their thoughts and needs. And so I'd love comments and feedback.
Okay.
Thanks so much for having me. I've had such a blast.
Mariyam Cementwala, thank you so much for joining us on Inclusive Collective. We'll be right back to wrap up with our reflections and rants and raves. All right, welcome back to Inclusive Collective. We just finished chatting with Mariyam Cementwala and Asad. So it's fun to have you here. One of the reasons I thought you would be a great guest host with Nadia out of town, and some of our listeners may not know this, is that you also are host of the American Muslim Project podcast.
Yeah, totally.
That was something that you hosted, right? So you talked with a lot of leaders, personalities, folks in the Muslim immigrant community. And so I, just wanted to tee it up for you. So after our conversation with
just a fascinating story. We only scratched the surface on her experience, and we brought it up earlier in the conversation, just like her outlook on life. I feel like for a lot of people, they don't want to answer the questions or have those tough conversations, and they put it on the other person to, go out and learn about me or my issues or my background, my identity, and all my history. And I just love this kind of her approach of like, it's going to be confusing, it's going to be chaos, but she's there to like help people, guide people through and answer questions along the way. So what did you think?
I love that piece as well. Even from the first part of the conversation where she talked about using the fact that you're memorable in order to give yourself privilege or to provide space for you as well. And so I thought that she had a lot of fresh perspectives and looked at things differently. I think is the right way to say it, in terms of just her identity and using it as a differentiator. And obviously she has super impressive career and background, and looking forward to all the great things that she does and produces with her new project, Blind Hijabi.
Yeah, I feel like the future of the world is in good hands if she's one of the people that's leading the way.
So many questions about her role at the State Department, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We need to clear it with the Biden administration, and then we'll have her back and we can just talk about all these things.
Everything,
from the State
all this
Department.
stuff,
I'd like to hear about her time working in the State Department under President Trump as well.
Yeah,
So
right. Lots
let's
of
get her back
interesting
for that.
things. Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's close it out. Asad, thanks again for doing this. Let's rant and rave. I got a long rant here.
Oh,
If
amazing.
you'll
Let's
give me a
yeah,
little bit of time. So
I
a
love
few
it.
things about that I want to say about this article that came out. I sent it over to you. Was from the Atlantic Monthly. And I think I think the DEI community will be talking about it a lot. So, first of all, just as a premise, right? So the DEI field, when I first started, it struck me as something that was much too wedded to training to be impactful, right?
Yeah.
I thought that it was too reliant on training. I didn't feel like there's enough focus on data, on strategy, and on impact. And that's what led me into this work. And
Yeah.
so, my co-host Nadia, who's normally here, she's a learning development specialist, and she also says that you can't rely on training to solve all your problems, right? And so
Yeah.
she's very fond of saying that. But that said, the piece that came out from the Atlantic, which had the main point that DEI, the industry itself, is ineffective, was garbage.
Yeah.
I thought it was an awful piece.
Yeah.
It was lazy. I thought it was intellectually dishonest. And it was a big, wet French kiss to right-wing legislators
Yeah,
that
sure.
want to, across the country that are working to make DEI go away. Right. And so, so why was it trash? Right. So two quick things. And then I have many more, and I'll probably
Oh,
go
let's talk
into
another 25 minutes on this. Let's do it.
but it equates DEI consultants with anti-bias and diversity training, which
Yeah.
right. So and it's
Can't do
too
that.
lazy to make that distinction, whether the writer and the editors did not understand that distinction or were too lazy
Seemed like they needed
make
to
that.
go into some DEI training themselves.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, exactly. Well, he also complains about the fact that he had to sit through it. So I mean, like
Yeah.
this is who we're dealing with in the writer. But so training is a piece of an overall consulting puzzle, right? So consulting is you're trying to develop strategy, you're trying to make things better, you're trying to create equity in the workplace and better work environments. It's a piece of it. It's not the entire industry. I thought it was just incredibly lazy. And then it also makes the point. So one of the premises is that the response to the George Floyd murder should never have been to work to create equity inside of corporations, but rather the focus had been on helping poor people. And so stop right there. Like, we live in the United States of America, right? Like, everything about our country is corporatist.
Yeah, right.
Everything revolves around corporations. If you remember, Mitt Romney wanted to make corporations people in 2012,
That's right. Yeah.
right? He loved his corporations.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in corporations, as you know. I always tell my wife, who's always been a healthcare worker, that there's people inside those big gray boxes that we call corporations that make $150,000 a year, and they can't even tie their shoes, right?
Yeah, right. For sure.
And I'm not speaking euphemistically, like, oh, they're really bad at their job. Like, no, they actually can't even tie their shoes.
Yeah.
And they make $150,000 a year, right? And so these are the jobs that so overwhelmingly go to unimpressive white men, right? So that's who's overrepresented in those roles. And those are the types of roles you need in order to lift people out of poverty to the middle class, from the middle class to the upper middle class, and then finally to the wealthy, right? These are the roles that allow you to buy a Tesla, right?
Yeah.
And you need those to be distributed equitably. To say that this is not important in creating equity in society is to not understand American society or the disparities that exist within those corporations. So I'm going to have so much more on this, Asad. I thought it was horrible.
Can I ask one question, or maybe it'll lead to an additional rant? But like, aren't it said 24 billion is being spent on initiatives and whatnot? Aren't we like just in the early innings of this whole thing? Like doesn't transformation and change take a while? Or like, I guess were these leaders thinking that like overnight, they would change hundreds of years of systemic racism and all sorts of issues?
There's a kernel of, right. So in terms of the argument, I mean, so there's this piece where people within the DEI industry think that there's things that could be done better, right? And so like, if there's one criticism, it is that leaders decided that we were going to throw money at the problem through a lot of the things that the writer points out, right?
Sure.
And we're going to do bias training, and we're going to spend a lot of money, and we're going to give a 1-hour seminar or a half-day seminar, and people are going to go back to their desks, and that's going to change things. And so that is fair game, right? And so that is laziness from corporate leaders that I think that it's justifiable to criticize that. However, like you say, that is the starting point. And, we're getting a heck of a lot smarter in how we attack inequity within corporations. And it talks about how much money is being made. It's expensive. I can tell you, I meet a lot of folks that work in this industry. There's no big DEI bag like waiting for you, right? Like if you,
Yeah, right,
like,
right. Yeah.
I can count on, one hand, and I mean, like, there's literally one person I've met in my work that I felt was disingenuous
Yeah.
in what we're trying to do. Most people are working really hard to try to make change. And so, yes. So
But
yeah, it
I
did
think
lead to another
also,
rant.
like, yeah. Well, I think also, as we found out from our story at the top, like, not investing in this is also expensive in terms of lawsuits and just being a shitty corporate employer and all sorts of stuff. So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. You
Oh
gotta,
yeah. Oh,
thanks for giving me
Let me
time for that.
just
Yeah. We're
let
still
me
doing
let
the
me
show.
cool down a little bit. It's quite emotional show today. Yeah, no, I think my rave is a little bit simple. So over here at Rifelion, we're holding a screenwriting contest for scripts by American Muslims, and I think our estimates were like, we kind of threw this together and put it out there over the course of a month. We were thinking maybe there'll be a dozen, and so far, like, deadline is today actually, and so far, we have almost 30. So we could have upwards of 50 scripts, and so it's just really exciting for us that there's so much talent out there that's really interested in what we're trying to do and want to get the stories out there about the American Muslim experience. So that to me is a rave, is just like there's this community out there that's like really excited to be heard.
That is so cool. And you got some favorites in there so far?
I haven't read them. I was waiting for most of them to come in, and then yeah,
Let's option
on
this. Yeah.
vacation, yeah, I'll sit down and read them all. So
Yeah. Let's option this. All
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Asad. Really appreciate you joining me on behalf of your sister, Nadia, today. If someone's going to replace Nadia, it has to be someone who's related to
In
her,
the
right?
family, yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be within the family.
Maybe my parents will actually listen now.
Yeah, excited. But let's just have everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Inclusive Collective is a production of Rifelion Media. We'd love to hear from you. Send us your feedback at inclusivecollective@rifelion.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. If you like what you heard, please be sure to subscribe and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to get in touch with us for consulting, check out my best friend, Nadia, at nasconsultants.com and myself, Rob, at takanoconsulting.com. Thanks again to our guest, Mariyam Cementwala, and thanks to you, my guest host, Asad Butt. Nadia will be back next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.